You're not invited to Mother's Day this year. This celebration is for real mothers only. My daughter-in-law's text message appeared on my phone at 7:14 that Sunday morning. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, because surely a woman of 71 years old could not be reading something so cruel from the person she'd welcomed into her family for nearly 15 years. A few seconds later, another notification appeared. Lauren Hayes had blocked my number. I stared at the screen while the lemon cake cooling on my kitchen counter filled the room with the scent of vanilla and citrus. The cake was for Ethan. My son had loved lemon cake since he was 8 years old. Every Mother's Day, no matter how busy life became, I made one. Some traditions feel permanent. Until they aren't. I'm Margaret Hayes. And until that morning, I believed family disagreements eventually healed. I believed kindness mattered. I believed my son would never allow anyone to treat me this way. I was wrong. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes it helps to know that someone, somewhere, is listening. The kitchen felt unusually quiet. Sunlight streamed through the curtains above the sink. The same curtains my late husband, Robert, had insisted on buying 20 years ago because they reminded him of the farmhouse where he grew up. Everything around me felt familiar, steady, safe. But the message on my phone changed the entire room. I picked up the cake knife, set it down again, then walked to the dining room where I'd already arranged fresh flowers in a crystal vase. There were 6 place settings. 1 for Ethan, 1 for Lauren, 2 for my grandchildren, 1 for my sister, Helen, and 1 for me. I had spent 2 days preparing. Not because anyone asked me to, because mothers do those things, even when their children stop noticing. I picked up my phone and called Ethan. The call went straight to voicemail. I frowned. Tried again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something heavier. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you're standing outside a room where everyone else already knows something you don't. At 8:02 a.m., my phone buzzed. For one hopeful second, I thought it might be Ethan. Instead, it was my granddaughter Emma. Or at least I thought it was. A photo appeared, then disappeared, deleted almost immediately. But not before I saw it. It was a screenshot from a family group chat. At the top was the title, Mother's Day Celebration 2026. Everyone's names were listed underneath. Lauren, Ethan, Emma, Jacob, Helen, my niece Rachel, my nephew Mark, even Lauren's parents. Everyone, except me. My hands froze around the phone. Maybe Emma had sent it by mistake. Maybe she hadn't realized what she was doing. Or maybe a 12-year-old girl had simply done what none of the adults were willing to do. Show me the truth. I enlarged the image. My name wasn't hidden. It wasn't forgotten. It wasn't accidentally omitted. I wasn't there at all. The realization landed harder than the original text message. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. A deliberate one. I sat down slowly at the dining table. The chair across from me was Ethan's usual seat. I could suddenly picture him reading Lauren's message before she sent it. Could picture him watching her type those words. Could picture him saying nothing. That hurt more than the message itself. Because cruelty from Lauren wasn't new. Silence from my son was. By noon, I still hadn't heard from him. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a simple explanation. Instead, I made the mistake of opening Facebook. Lauren had posted a photograph 30 minutes earlier. The entire family stood outside a beautiful restaurant downtown. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked happy. The caption read, "Celebrating the amazing mothers who helped shape our family." My eyes scanned every face. My sister, my niece, my grandchildren, my son, all standing together. Without me, thousands of strangers began liking the post, commenting, sharing. One comment caught my attention. "Where's Margaret?" For a brief moment, I felt relieved. At least someone noticed. Then Lauren replied. 3 short sentences. 3 sentences I would never forget. "She's staying home today." Some traditions need updating. Not everyone earns a seat at every table. I stared at the words until they blurred. The room suddenly felt smaller. The silence louder. The lemon cake sat untouched in the kitchen. The flowers I bought that morning already seemed foolish. But what hurt most wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't the Facebook post. It wasn't even being excluded from Mother's Day. It was the realization that this hadn't happened overnight. No. As I sat there alone, pieces of the past began fitting together. Missed invitations. Changed plans. family photos I never received, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. And for the first time, I started asking myself a question I should have asked years ago. How long had they been erasing me before I finally noticed? The answer would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to enjoy after Robert and I finished dinner and settled into our evening routines. This silence felt different. Heavy. Unwelcome. Like the house itself knew something I didn't want to admit. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself standing in the hallway outside Robert's old study. The door was slightly open. It had remained that way since the day he died 3 years ago. I pushed it wider and stepped inside. His leather chair still sat beside the window. His reading lamp rested on the side table. Even now, I couldn't bring myself to move some of his things. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar wood. For a few moments, I simply stood there, looking, remembering, listening to a life that no longer existed. When Robert was alive, Mother's Day had always been his favorite holiday. Not because of gifts, not because of celebrations, because he believed mothers deserved to be appreciated. Every year, he would wake up before me, make coffee, burn the toast, pretend he hadn't, then hand me some ridiculous homemade card that looked like it had been created by a second grader. I still had every one of them, stored in a box upstairs. Safe. Protected. Unlike everything else. I sat down in his chair and stared out the window. The sun was beginning to rise. A pale orange glow spreading across the backyard. For a moment, I imagined what Robert would have said if he had seen Lauren's message. The answer came instantly. He would have called Ethan. Immediately. And Ethan would have answered. That realization hurt more than I expected. Because somewhere along the way, my son had stopped being the man his father raised. And I couldn't figure out when it happened. Or why. The coffee maker beeped from the kitchen. I had started it without thinking. Some habits survive grief. Others survive betrayal. I poured myself a cup and sat at the kitchen table. The Facebook post was still open on my phone. More comments had appeared overnight. Most were harmless. People wishing everyone a happy Mother's Day, complimenting the restaurant, praising the family photo. Then I saw another comment. One from Helen, my own sister. Such a beautiful gathering. My stomach tightened. Helen knew I wasn't there. She knew exactly what Lauren had done. And she had said nothing. Not one phone call. Not one text. Not even a simple question asking if I was okay. I set the phone face down. Sometimes disappointment arrives all at once. Other times it comes one person at a time. By mid-morning, I found myself wandering through the house. Not cleaning. Not organizing. Just walking. The family photos hanging on the walls seemed different now. I stopped in front of one taken 7 years earlier. A Thanksgiving picture. Everyone was smiling. Ethan stood beside me with his arm around my shoulders. Lauren stood on his other side. At first glance, it looked perfect. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. Lauren wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at me. Not smiling. Watching. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. That Thanksgiving had been the first year she insisted on hosting dinner herself. She had been polite, friendly, helpful. But afterward, she began making small changes. Tiny things. Easy to dismiss. Family dinners moved to her house. Holiday schedules became more complicated. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. At the time, I blamed adulthood. Marriage. Busy lives. Now I wasn't so sure. I remembered another moment. Emma's 8th birthday. Lauren had told me the party started at 2. When I arrived, guests were already leaving. Presents had been opened. Cake had been served. The celebration was practically over. Lauren had laughed. Oh no, did I text the wrong time? I believed her. Because that's what mothers do. We look for innocent explanations. We protect our children from uncomfortable truths, even when those truths are standing right in front of us. Another memory followed. Then another. Christmas dinner moved without notice. A family vacation I learned about from social media. A school recital where every grandparent received an invitation except me. Each event seemed small by itself. Harmless. Forgettable. Together, they formed something else. A pattern. A deliberate one. The realization settled over me slowly. Lauren hadn't excluded me from Mother's Day. Not really. Mother's Day was simply the first time she stopped hiding it. Around noon, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped. Ethan. Finally. I answered immediately. Hello. Silence. Then his voice. Mom. Nothing else. Just one word. Cold. Careful. As if he were speaking to a stranger. I gripped the phone tighter. Ethan. Another pause. Long enough to make my stomach twist. I heard you were upset. Not I'm sorry. Not let's talk. Not even what happened. Just that. I heard you were upset. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Because they told me everything. He already knew. He knew exactly what Lauren had done. And he wasn't calling to fix it. He was calling to manage my reaction. I closed my eyes. Suddenly exhausted. Ethan, I said quietly. Did you know she sent that message? The line went silent. 3 seconds. 4. 5. I had known my son his entire life. And in that silence, I got my answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded distant. Lauren was only trying to make things easier. Easier? For whom? I stared out the kitchen window at the empty backyard. At the swing set Robert built for the grandchildren years ago. At the garden we planted together. At the life that suddenly felt farther away than ever. Because in that moment, for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Lauren wasn't acting alone. And if my son had chosen her side, then the family I thought I had might already be gone. I spent the rest of Monday trying to convince myself not to go. People with dignity don't chase invitations. That's what I told myself. Again and again. Yet by Tuesday morning, I found myself searching online for the restaurant Lauren had tagged in her Mother's Day photos. The reservation had been made at Willow and Vine, one of the most expensive restaurants downtown. The kind of place with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and valet parking. The kind of place Ethan used to joke was too fancy for normal people. Apparently not anymore. I stared at the address on my phone for several minutes. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want revenge. I wanted answers. After 3 years of losing pieces of my family without understanding why, I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was driving downtown. The closer I got, the tighter my chest felt. Traffic lights blurred past. Storefronts glowed in the evening sun. Part of me hoped I was making a mistake. That maybe there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Something reasonable. Something human. Deep down, though, I already knew better. When I arrived, the restaurant parking lot was nearly full. I sat in my car for a moment, watching people walk through the entrance. Laughing, talking, holding doors open for one another. Simple acts of kindness. Things that suddenly felt very far away from my own life. Finally, I stepped out, smoothed my blouse, lifted my chin, and walked inside. The hostess greeted me with a practiced smile. Good evening. I returned the smile. I believe my family has a reservation. She glanced at her tablet. What name? Hayes. Her fingers moved across the screen. For a second, everything seemed normal. Then her expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. The smile faded. Her eyes flickered toward me. Then back to the screen. Then back to me again. A look I recognized immediately. Pity. My stomach dropped. I'm sorry, she said carefully. I don't see your name here. I forced a small laugh. Perhaps it's under Ethan Hayes. She searched. Again. The silence stretched. Then she swallowed. No, ma'am. I nodded slowly, trying to remain calm. There must be some mistake. She hesitated. Another glance toward the screen. Then she lowered her voice. The reservation notes specifically mentioned the guest list. Something cold moved through me. Guest list. She looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. As I said, ma'am, your name isn't included. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't understand. Because I understood perfectly. Lauren hadn't simply failed to invite me. She had anticipated that I might come. And she had prepared for it. Humiliation has a strange way of arriving. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's silent. This one felt surgical. Planned. Precise. The hostess looked genuinely sorry. That somehow made it worse. I thanked her, turned away, and walked toward the lobby windows. From there, I could see most of the main dining room. And then I saw them. My family. All of them. My son sat near the center of the table. Lauren beside him. Emma and Jacob laughing across from them. Helen was there too. So was Rachel. Mark. Even Lauren's parents. Every single seat occupied. Every single face familiar. I stood motionless, watching a celebration that should have included me. Watching my family continue without me as though I'd never existed. Then something happened that hurt even more. Ethan laughed. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard from him in months. Not because he was pretending. Because he was happy. For years I'd told myself he was stressed. Busy. Caught between his wife and his mother. But looking through that window, I saw something I hadn't wanted to admit. He wasn't trapped. He was participating. A waiter arrived carrying glasses of champagne. Everyone stood. Lauren picked up her glass. The room gradually quieted. She was about to speak. I should have left. I know that now. But I couldn't move. I needed to hear it. Needed to know exactly who she was when she believed I wasn't listening. Lauren smiled at the room. Confident. Comfortable. Completely in control. Before dinner begins, she said, I'd like to make a toast. Everyone raised their glasses. My son included. Lauren's eyes moved around the table. Then she smiled again. A different smile this time. Sharper. Colder. The kind that never reached her eyes. To the women who actually raised this family. The table erupted in laughter. Not everyone. But enough. Enough for me to hear. Enough for me to feel it. I saw Ethan lower his eyes. But he didn't object. Didn't defend me. Didn't leave. Didn't do anything. The room continued laughing. And then I heard someone ask a question. A woman's voice. I couldn't see who. But I heard every word. What about Margaret? Silence followed. Brief. Uncomfortable. Then Lauren answered. And the moment she did, I realized the worst humiliation of my life was still waiting for me on the other side of that restaurant window. Because the expression on Ethan's face told me he already knew exactly what she was about to say. What about Margaret? The question hung over the table. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even through the restaurant window, I could feel the tension. Then Lauren smiled. It wasn't the smile she posted on social media. It wasn't the smile she used around strangers. This one was different. Smaller. Sharper. The smile of someone who believed she had already won. Margaret, she repeated lightly. As if she had to think about the answer. As if my name required consideration. A few people chuckled. My stomach tightened. Then Lauren lifted her champagne glass and shrugged. Margaret was more of a sponsor than a mother. The laughter came faster this time. Louder. Not from everyone. But enough. Enough for me to hear it through the glass. Enough for me to feel every word land. I stood frozen. Unable to look away. Unable to believe what I was hearing. A sponsor. Not a mother. I thought about the years I spent driving Ethan to baseball practice. The nights I stayed awake when he had pneumonia. The double shifts I worked after Robert's company struggled during the recession. The birthdays. The school plays. The college tuition. The endless sacrifices mothers make without keeping score. A sponsor. One sentence. 71 years reduced to one sentence. And then I looked at Ethan. Waiting. Praying. Begging silently for him to say something. Anything. That's not true. Lauren, stop. She's my mother. Just 3 words would have been enough. But they never came. He lowered his eyes toward the table and stayed silent. That silence hurt more than Lauren's insult ever could. Because cruelty from an outsider is one thing. Permission from your own child is something else entirely. Someone near the end of the table laughed nervously. Another guest changed the subject. The moment passed. Dinner continued. Conversations resumed. Forks scraped plates. Glasses clinked together. As though nothing unusual had happened. As though a woman's entire life hadn't just been dismissed in front of her family. I stepped back from the window, suddenly feeling exhausted. The restaurant lights blurred. For the first time all evening, tears threatened to come. But they didn't. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was too angry. Or maybe there comes a point when heartbreak becomes too large for tears. I turned toward the exit. All I wanted was to go home. To leave. To forget what I'd seen. But before I reached the door, another voice drifted through the dining room. A child's voice. Emma. My granddaughter. What does that mean? The room became quiet again. I stopped walking. Listening. Lauren laughed softly. It means some people help pay for things. Another pause. But that doesn't make them family. The words hit harder than the first insult. Because this time they weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at a child. A lesson. A message. An attempt to teach my granddaughter how to see me. How to diminish me. How to erase me. I looked back toward the table. Emma didn't look convinced. Thank God for that. She glanced toward Ethan, waiting for her father to respond, waiting for an adult to correct what had just been said. But Ethan remained silent again. And in that moment, something changed inside me. Not anger. Not revenge. Acceptance. For years I had been trying to preserve a version of my family that no longer existed. A version where love automatically meant loyalty. A version where blood protected relationships. A version where my son would always choose what was right. That family was gone. Perhaps it had been gone for years. I was simply the last person to realize it. I stepped outside into the evening air. The sun had almost disappeared. The city lights were beginning to glow. A cool breeze moved through the parking lot. For several minutes, I stood beside my car without moving, trying to gather myself, trying to understand what came next. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, not hurried. I turned. An older man was walking toward me from the restaurant entrance. Late 60s, gray hair, dark suit, familiar face. It took me a moment to recognize him. Then I did. Charles Whitmore, Robert's attorney, the man who had handled nearly every legal matter for our family for more than 20 years. I hadn't spoken to him since Robert's funeral. Charles stopped a few feet away. His expression was serious, concerned, not surprised, as though he had expected to find me standing there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he glanced back toward the restaurant windows, toward the table where my family was still celebrating, and shook his head, slowly, disappointed. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I was hoping I'd find you before you left." Something in his voice made my pulse quicken. Not sympathy, not pity, concern, real concern. The kind that appears when someone knows something important, something dangerous, something you haven't discovered yet. I tried to smile. "I'm afraid you picked a bad night." Charles looked toward the restaurant again, then back at me. "No," he said. His voice was calm, certain. "Actually, I think this is exactly the night we need to talk." Then he reached inside his briefcase and pulled out a large sealed envelope. My name was written across the front, in Robert's handwriting. The moment I saw it, every thought disappeared, because my husband had been gone for 3 years, and somehow, a message from him had just found its way back into my life. For several seconds, I couldn't take my eyes off the envelope. My name was written across the front. Margaret Hayes. The handwriting was unmistakable. Roberts. My husband had been gone for 3 years. Yet somehow, standing in a restaurant parking lot after the most humiliating evening of my life, I was staring at words written by his hand. My fingers trembled slightly. Charles noticed. "Let's sit down," he said quietly. "There are some things you need to know." 5 minutes later, we were sitting at a small coffee shop across the street. Neither of us ordered anything. The envelope rested on the table between us. Neither of us touched it. Not yet. Outside the window, I could still see Willow and Vine. Still see people coming and going. Still see the warm lights glowing inside. My family was still celebrating. Still laughing. Still pretending I didn't exist. Charles folded his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence made me nervous. Finally, I spoke. "What is this?" His expression tightened. "A precaution." "A precaution against what?" He looked directly at me. "Against exactly what's happening now." A chill moved through me. I glanced back at the envelope, then at him. "What are you talking about?" Charles leaned back in his chair, carefully choosing his words. "Your husband loved you very much, Margaret." The simple sentence almost broke me, because I hadn't heard anyone say those words in a long time. Not since Robert died. Charles continued. "And before he passed, he became concerned about certain things." I frowned. "What things?" "Ethan." The answer surprised me. "Not Lauren. Ethan. My son." Charles seemed to notice my reaction. "He wasn't concerned about Ethan's character," he said. "He was concerned about Ethan's weakness." I didn't understand. Charles sighed. "Your husband believed Ethan was too easily influenced." The words lingered in the air. Suddenly, memories surfaced. Robert arguing quietly with Ethan during family dinners. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The worried look Robert sometimes carried when Lauren was around. At the time, I thought it was normal family tension. Nothing more. Now I wasn't so sure. Charles opened his briefcase, pulled out several documents. Not legal papers. Printouts. Emails. Notes. Dates. My eyes moved across the pages. Most of them were years old. Some dated back almost 5 years. I looked up. "What is this?" Charles hesitated, then answered. "Evidence." The word immediately made my stomach tighten. Evidence of what? He slid one document toward me. I read the first few lines. It was an email, written by Lauren. The message wasn't addressed to me, or Ethan. It had been sent to a friend. Most of it was harmless, until I reached one sentence. One sentence that made my heart stop. "The old woman still thinks she's part of every decision." I read it again, then a third time. The old woman. She was talking about me. The email was 4 years old. For years. Long before Mother's Day. Long before the Facebook posts. Long before the text message. I slowly looked up. Charles nodded. "As I said, this didn't start recently." The coffee shop suddenly felt smaller. The room quieter. Every memory from the past several years seemed to shift, as though someone had adjusted the lighting and revealed details I hadn't noticed before. Charles handed me another document. Then another. A pattern emerged quickly. Again and again, Lauren referred to me as an obstacle. A problem. An inconvenience. Never family. Never grandmother. Never mother. Just someone standing in the way. I swallowed hard. Did Ethan know? Charles didn't answer immediately. That alone frightened me. Finally, he spoke. I believe he knew more than he should have. The words landed heavily. Not because they confirmed my fears, because they left room for worse possibilities. Charles reached into his briefcase again. This time he removed a thin folder. Unlike the others, it was marked confidential. He stared at it for several seconds before speaking. There's another reason I asked you here tonight. I felt my pulse quicken. What reason? His expression grew even more serious. The Mother's Day incident wasn't the real issue. The sentence immediately caught my attention. What do you mean? Charles lowered his voice. The exclusion. The insults. The social media posts. He shook his head. Those were symptoms. I stared at him. Symptoms of what? For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely troubled. The answer clearly made him uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. A much larger plan. The air seemed to leave the room. Outside, traffic continued moving. People continued walking. Life continued normally. Yet suddenly nothing felt normal anymore. Charles pushed the confidential folder toward me. I looked down. My name appeared several times across the documents. So did Ethan's. And Lauren's. Then I saw another phrase. A phrase that immediately sent fear through my chest. Future housing transition plan. I looked up sharply. Charles met my eyes. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. Margaret, he said quietly, I don't think Lauren was trying to remove you from Mother's Day. My heart began pounding, because somehow I already knew what he was about to say. Charles took a slow breath, then delivered the sentence that changed everything. I think she was trying to remove you from the family entirely. And that was the moment I realized Mother's Day had never been the real betrayal. It was only the warning sign. I didn't open the folder until I got home. Part of me wanted to. Part of me was afraid to. For 3 years after Robert died, I had survived by believing certain things. Believing my son loved me. Believing family disagreements were temporary. Believing that no matter how distant people became, there were lines they would never cross. That folder threatened every one of those beliefs. The house was dark when I walked inside. The lemon cake still sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The flowers had begun to wilt. Only 2 days had passed since Mother's Day. It felt like 2 years. I placed the folder on the dining room table and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened it. The first several pages were financial summaries, property records, trust documents, meeting notes. At first, none of it made sense. The language was technical, formal, carefully written. Then I reached a page with highlighted sections. Someone had marked several paragraphs in yellow. My eyes stopped on a familiar address. I read it again and again. The lake house. Robert's lake house. The property had belonged to his family for almost 60 years. It was where Ethan learned to fish, where we spent summers after he was born, where Robert taught our grandchildren how to roast marshmallows over a fire pit. That place wasn't just real estate. It was memory, history, family. Yet according to the documents in front of me, discussions had already begun regarding its sale. My chest tightened. There was no signature yet, no final agreement. But there were plans, evaluations, projected profits, future investment strategies. Page after page. The property had become a financial asset. Nothing more. I turned another page. Then another. A list of meeting participants appeared. Lauren, Ethan, financial advisor, real estate consultant, attorney. My eyes moved down the page. I searched for my name. It wasn't there. Not once. I sat back in my chair. The room suddenly felt colder. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't poor communication. This was exclusion. Deliberate exclusion. The same pattern all over again. Mother's Day, family vacations, birthdays, and now family property. Every important decision moved forward without me, as if I were already gone. A small note paper-clipped to one of the documents caught my attention. Handwritten. Brief. I almost missed it. The note read, Margaret unlikely to participate in future planning discussions. I stared at the sentence. Unlikely to participate. Not unwilling. Not unavailable. Unlikely. As though someone had already decided my role. As though my opinion no longer mattered. I remembered Lauren's words at the restaurant. That doesn't make them family. The same attitude appeared everywhere now. In conversations. In plans. In paperwork. The cruelty wasn't emotional anymore. It had become administrative. Organized. Professional. I continued reading. Several pages later, I found the phrase Charles had mentioned. Future housing transition plan. This time I read every word carefully. Halfway through the document, my hands became cold. Very cold. The plan discussed future living arrangements, healthcare considerations, lifestyle changes, support systems. At first glance, it sounded harmless. Responsible, even. Then I noticed something disturbing. Every recommendation involved me leaving my home. Not one option involved remaining there. Not one. The house Robert and I had. Shared for nearly 40 years. The house where Ethan grew up. The house where every Christmas morning began. According to this document, my future existed somewhere else. A smaller residence. A managed community. A transition property. The words were polished. Respectful. Professional. But the meaning underneath them was simple. Move Margaret out. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Then I noticed another handwritten note in the margin. Different handwriting this time. Lawrence. I recognized it immediately. 3 words. Small. Casual. Written beside one recommendation. She won't fight. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Not because the sentence was cruel. Because it was confident. Lauren truly believed she understood me. Believed she had already measured my response. Believed I would quietly accept whatever happened next. I opened my eyes and stared at the note. The more I looked at it, the angrier I became. Not explosive anger. Not loud anger. Something colder. More dangerous. The kind that arrives when confusion finally disappears. For weeks I had been asking why. Why the exclusion? Why the insults? Why the silence? Now I was beginning to understand. Because people planning to remove someone from the future often start by removing them from the present. First, the invitations disappear. Then the conversations. Then the decisions. Eventually, the person disappears too. At least, that had been Lauren's plan. I turned to the final section of the folder. Several pages remained. Most contained legal references I didn't fully understand. Then one paragraph caught my attention. A specific clause. Attached to Robert's trust. I read the first line. Then immediately sat forward. My pulse quickened. Unlike everything else, this paragraph had not been highlighted. Almost as if someone hoped it would go unnoticed. I read it a second time. Then a third. And slowly, for the first time since Mother's Day began, something unexpected appeared. Hope. Because hidden inside that clause was a condition. A very specific condition. One that directly affected inheritance rights. One that directly affected family property. And one that Ethan and Lauren clearly didn't know. Existed. I stared at Robert's signature at the bottom of the page. Then I smiled. A small smile. The first genuine smile I'd felt in days. Because for the first time, I realized something important. Lauren had spent years planning my future. But she had forgotten one thing. Robert had planned for hers too. 3 days later, Charles called. His voice was calm. Professional. Almost too calm. The meeting is scheduled for Friday afternoon. I already knew which meeting he meant. The family trust review. The same meeting Ethan and Lauren had apparently been preparing for over the past several months. A meeting I had never been told about. Until now. I stood by the kitchen window while Charles explained the details. Location. Time. Attendees. Documents. The entire conversation felt surreal. A week earlier, I had been trying to understand why I wasn't invited to Mother's Day. Now I was preparing to walk into a room where the future of my family would be decided. And for the first time in years, I wasn't walking in blind. When the call ended, I remained standing there for several minutes, looking out at the backyard, at the swing set Robert built, at the garden we planted together. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything felt different. Because knowledge changes people, especially painful knowledge. Once you see the truth, you can never return to the comfort of uncertainty. Friday arrived quickly. The meeting was held in a private conference room downtown. The same law office where Robert had handled most of his business affairs for years. I arrived early. Very early. Partly because I wanted time to think. Mostly because I wanted to watch. To observe. To see what people looked like when they believed they had already won. The first to arrive was Lauren. She entered the conference room carrying a leather folder and a designer handbag. Confident. Relaxed. Smiling. The kind of smile people wear when they expect good news. She barely acknowledged me. Just a brief nod. Nothing more. No apology. No embarrassment. No discomfort. As though Mother's Day had never happened. As though excluding me from my own family was perfectly normal. A few minutes later, Ethan arrived. For a moment, our eyes met. The room felt strangely quiet. I wondered if he would say something. Anything. But he didn't. He simply sat beside Lauren. The same place he always sat. The same side he always chose. The silence between us stretched across the room. Years of memories sitting quietly between mother and son. Neither of us touching them. More relatives arrived. Helen, Rachel, Mark, a financial advisor, 2 attorneys. Everyone settled into their seats. Small conversations filled the room. Polite laughter. Casual greetings. The atmosphere felt surprisingly cheerful. That was the strange part. Most people seemed excited. Almost celebratory. As though this were not a legal meeting, but the beginning of something wonderful. And perhaps for some of them, it was. I noticed Lauren leaning toward Ethan several times. Whispering. Smiling. At one point, she even squeezed his hand. The gesture caught my attention. Not because it was affectionate. Because it was triumphant. I had seen that look before. The look of someone mentally spending money they don't yet possess. The look of certainty. And certainty can be dangerous. Especially when it's misplaced. Eventually, Charles entered. The room quieted immediately. He greeted everyone politely before taking his seat at the head of the table. Several folders sat in front of him, including one I recognized. The same folder I had read 3 nights earlier. My pulse quickened. Across the table, Lauren looked completely relaxed. Her confidence seemed almost effortless. At one point, she opened her notebook. I couldn't help noticing several handwritten bullet points. Future investment. Lake property. Education fund. Vacation home. Plans. Assumptions. Expectations. An entire future already mapped out. A future she clearly believed belonged to her. Charles began speaking. The first part of the meeting was routine. Financial summaries. Property evaluations. Administrative updates. Legal language filled the room. Most of it meant very little to anyone outside the attorneys. Yet I noticed something important. Every time Charles mentioned trust assets, Lauren became more attentive, more focused, almost eager, like a gambler, waiting for the final card. Then came the lake house discussion. The room immediately became more alert. Several people leaned forward, including Lauren. Charles reviewed the property's current valuation. The estimated market value had increased significantly, far more than I expected. I watched Lauren's eyes widen slightly. Then she quickly composed herself. But I noticed. So did Charles. The room continued discussing numbers, options, future considerations. Meanwhile, I found myself studying my son, trying to understand him, trying to reconcile the boy I raised with the man sitting across from me. He looked tired, older than I remembered. Not guilty, not ashamed, just tired. For a brief moment, I wondered whether he understood how far things had gone, whether he realized what Lauren had set in motion, or whether he had simply followed her for so long that he no longer knew how to stop. Then Charles closed one folder, opened another, and the room changed. The atmosphere shifted instantly, subtly, but unmistakably, the way air changes before a storm. I believe, Charles said calmly, it's time we discuss a specific provision added by Robert Hayes shortly before his passing. The room became silent. Lauren looked confused. Ethan frowned. Several relatives exchanged glances. I remained still, because I already knew what was coming, or at least part of it. Charles adjusted his glasses, then lifted a single document from the folder. A document no one else in the room appeared to recognize. My heart began beating faster. Across the table, Lauren's confident smile slowly faded. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. And that was when I knew. Whatever Robert had written, neither Lauren nor Ethan had ever seen it before. The conference room became completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Charles held the document in his hands and adjusted his glasses. Across the table, Lauren's confident smile had disappeared. Ethan looked confused, even nervous. For the first time all afternoon, neither of them appeared certain about what was coming next. Charles cleared his throat. This provision was added 6 months before Robert Hayes passed away. His voice was calm, measured, professional, the same voice I had heard dozens of times over the years. Yet today, every word felt different. Because today, Robert was about to speak through someone else. Charles looked around the room, then began reading. If any beneficiary intentionally seeks to isolate, manipulate, humiliate, or remove my wife, Margaret Hayes, from her family relationships or decision-making authority, that beneficiary's inheritance rights may be subject to immediate review and forfeiture. The room froze. No one expected those words. No one. I watched faces change one by one. Confusion, shock, disbelief, then realization. Across the table, Lauren stopped breathing for a second. I saw it happen. A tiny pause. A tiny crack in the certainty she had carried into the room. Charles continued. The determination of such conduct shall be based upon documented patterns of behavior, witness testimony, written communications, and any evidence deemed relevant by the trust administrator. Every sentence landed heavier than the last, because suddenly all those emails mattered. All those messages. All those plans. All those years. Nothing was invisible anymore. Charles carefully placed several documents on the table. Copies. Evidence. The same materials he had shown me days earlier. Emails. Planning notes. Meeting records. Social media screenshots. Written communications. The room became quieter with every page. Nobody looked comfortable. Nobody. Then came the Mother's Day text message. Printed. Time-stamped. Preserved. The exact words Lauren had sent me. The exact words that started everything. Several relatives lowered their eyes. Helen included. I noticed she couldn't even look at me anymore. Then Charles displayed the restaurant reservation notes. The guest list. The instructions. The deliberate exclusion. Evidence that my absence had been planned. Not forgotten. Not accidental. Planned. Lauren's face had become pale. Very pale. For the first time since Mother's Day, she looked afraid. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not discomfort. Fear. Because the story she had spent years controlling was no longer hers. Then Charles presented the housing. Transition documents. The notes. The recommendations. The handwritten comment. She won't fight. I watched Lauren's eyes lock onto those words. Her own handwriting. Her own assumption. The room remained silent. No one defended her. No one could. The evidence spoke for itself. For years she had worked carefully, quietly, patiently, believing nobody was paying attention, believing nobody would ever connect the pieces, believing I was too old, too trusting, too isolated to notice. She had underestimated one person, Robert. Even after death, he had seen farther than any of us. When Charles finally finished, he closed the folder. The room remained completely still. Then Ethan spoke. The first genuine words I had heard from my son in weeks. Mom. His voice cracked. Just slightly. But I heard it. Everyone did. He turned toward me. For a moment, I saw something familiar. Not the distant man from the restaurant. Not the silent husband sitting beside Lauren. I saw my son. The boy I had raised. The boy who once brought me dandelions from the backyard and called them flowers. The boy who used to hold my hand crossing parking lots. The boy I thought had disappeared. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry. The words arrived years too late. But they were real. And sometimes reality matters more than timing. Lauren immediately turned toward him. Ethan, but he shook his head. For the first time, he interrupted her. No. Just one word. No. A small word. Yet somehow it carried more weight than every excuse he had made over the past several years. The room watched quietly. Nobody intervened. Nobody needed to. Because the truth was finally sitting at the table. And truth has a way of speaking for itself. The trust administrators eventually reached their decision. The inheritance provisions affecting Ethan and Lauren would be reviewed under the clause Robert created. Several financial benefits were suspended pending further evaluation. The lake house would remain protected. Future property decisions would require my direct involvement. And for the first time in years, nobody questioned whether my voice belonged in the room. The meeting ended shortly afterward. People left quietly. One by one. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered awkward apologies. I accepted none of them. Not because I was angry. Because healing and accountability are not the same thing. Outside the building, the afternoon sun felt warm against my face. Charles walked beside me to the parking lot. Before leaving, he smiled. A small smile. Robert would be proud of you. I looked down for a moment, then nodded. Because for the first time since he died, I believed that might be true. A year later, Mother's Day arrived again. This time, I hosted dinner at the lake house. The same lake house Lauren had planned to sell. The same place where Ethan learned to fish. The same place where Robert taught our grandchildren how to build campfires. The table wasn't crowded. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Emma was there. Jacob was there. A few close friends were there. People who wanted to be there. Not because of obligation, because of love. As the sun began setting over the water, I carried out a lemon cake. The same recipe Ethan loved when he was a little boy. For a moment, I simply stood there looking at it, remembering, smiling. The empty chair beside me remained empty. Not every relationship survives betrayal. Not every wound fully heals. But peace doesn't come from getting everything back. Peace comes from finally seeing clearly. The previous Mother's Day, I thought I had lost my family. What I actually lost was an illusion. And once that illusion disappeared, something unexpected took its place. Freedom. Not from family. Not from love. But from the fear of begging for a seat at a table where I already belonged. Because the truth is this. A mother doesn't become less valuable because someone refuses to appreciate her. And a woman doesn't lose her place in a family simply because another person tries to erase it. Sometimes the people who push you away reveal something important. Not who you are, but who they are. And that was the gift Robert left me. The truth. Even after he was gone.